Hello everyone, welcome to Fullmoon movie. Romeo is Bleeding is a film that deliberately denies the audience moral footing. It does not ask you to sympathize, admire, or even fully understand its central character. Instead, it traps you inside his contradictions and watches what happens when desire, fear, and self-delusions collide. This is not nor as romantic fatalism, it's a nor as a humiliation where power is never possessed, only briefly borrowed. At the center of the film is Gary Oldman delivering one of the most reckless and fascinating performances of his career. His Jack Grimaldi is a corrupt New York cop, but the film quickly makes it clear that corruption is not his defining trait, but cowardice is. Jack is not motivated by ideology, loyalty, or even greed in the traditional sense. He is motivated by appetite for money, for validation, for erotic control, and he consistently overestimates his ability to manage the consequences of that appetite. Oldman plays Jack as a man constantly acting even when alone. His voice posture and expression shifts depending on who he's with. He believes he's smarter than everyone else in the room, yet the film exposes this belief as a fantasy. Jack doesn't control situations. He improvises lies fast enough to survive the moment. Now that distinction matters because Romeo is Bleeding is not about criminal mastery, it's about moral incompetence. The film's most destabilizing force arrives in the form of Mona Demarkov, played with ferocious confidence by Lena Olin. Mona is not a femme fatale in the traditional noir sense. She does not lure Jack into danger, she dominates him. From the first encounter, power dynamics invert. Jack believes he's exploiting her. In reality, she sees through him instantly. What makes Mona terrifying is not her violence, but her clarity. She knows exactly who Jack is, and she has no interest in pretending otherwise. Their relationship is not erotic in a conventional way, it's sadistic, performative, and deeply psychological. Jack is aroused not by intimacy but by humiliation. Mona understands that this and uses it as a leverage. The film suggests that Jack's corruption is inseparable from his desire to be punished. His fantasies are not about escape but exposure. Now, this is where Romeo is Bleeding becomes especially uncomfortable. It refuses to frame Jack as a tragic anti-hero. There is no noble contradiction in him. His self-loathing is not reflective, it's indulgent. He knows he's weak, and instead of confronting that weakness, he eroticizes it. The film never redeems this behavior, it simply documents it. Stylistically, the film leans into heightened neo aesthetics, sharp lighting, stylized interiors, exaggerated performances, but always with an edge of irony. The visuals feel slightly unreal, almost theatrical, reinforcing the idea that Jack lives inside a fantasy of himself. Reality intrudes violently and often absurdly. When violence occurs, it is not a cathartic. It is clumsy, cruel, and embarrassing. The narrative structure mirrors Jack's psychological unraveling. Plans collapse quickly, alliances shift without warning. Jack believes he's navigating a web of criminals, cops, and mobsters, but the truth is simpler and harsher. Everyone sees him clearly, and no one respects him. His survival depends on not just intelligence, but on how long others find him useful. What separates Romeo is Bleeding from more conventional neo films is its absence of nostalgia. There is no longing for a lost moral order, no sense that things were once better. Corruption is not a deviation, it is the baseline. The city feels rotten not because of crime, but because of emotional emptiness. Relationships are transactional, loyalty is performative, and love is indistinguishable from exploitation. Jax's marriage, like everything else in his life, is hollow. It exists as an obligation rather than connection. The film does not dwell on domestic conflict because it doesn't need to. Jack is emotionally unavailable to everyone, including himself. Mona doesn't break him, in fact, she reveals him. The film's tone is unapologetically cruel, but it also is precise. It understands that certain kinds of masculinity are built on illusions, the illusion of control, dominance, and sexual authority. Jack embodies that illusion completely, and watches it collapse is the film's central pleasure. But it is a bitter pleasure. There is no moral satisfaction in his downfall, only recognition. Now, by the time the film reaches its conclusion, Jack is not transformed, he is exposed. The ending does not punish him in a grand operatic way. Instead, it leaves him diminished, stripped of fantasy, stripped of narrative importance. Now, this is crucial. The film refuses to mythologize his suffering. He is not a cautionary tale elevated into tragedy. He is simply what remains when delusion burns out. What makes Romeo Is Bleeding endure and why it remains divisive is its refusal to flatter the audience. It doesn't invite identification, it doesn't provide moral anchoring, it asks you to observe rather than empathize. Now, that distance is intentional. The film wants to discomfort you, not catharsis. In the broader context of the 1990s neo-noir, Romeo Is Bleeding stands apart because it strips the noir of its romanticism. There is no cold detachment here, no stylish melancholy. There is no exposure. Desire leads not to transcendence, but to degradation. Power is temporary, fantasy is fragile. Ultimately, Romeo Is Bleeding is a film about self-deception, how people construct identities to survive their own emptiness, and how those identities collapse under scrutiny. It is ugly, confrontational, and deeply cynical, but also strangely honest. It doesn't ask whether Jack deserves what happens to him. It suggests that deserving has nothing to do with it. Now, this is not a film you revisit for comfort or inspiration. You revisit it for clarity, the kind that hurts because it reveals how easily confidence masks fear and how often corruption begins not with ideology but with desire. Now, this movie is a must watch.